Picture this. A folded parchment slips into the hands of a trusted courier, its wax seal unbroken, but beneath that unassuming surface lies a message written in invisible ink, a hidden plea for alliance that could alter the fate of kingdoms. This wasn't the stuff of fiction in the Middle Ages. It was the daily reality of rulers who knew that words, when wielded with secrecy, held more power than swords. Across Europe and beyond, monarchs and merchants, popes and princes, all played a dangerous game of whispers and shadows, where one misread symbol or intercepted letter could mean the difference between triumph and catastrophe. The medieval world thrived on intrigue, and at its heart lay an art few have fully uncovered, the secret language of codes and spies. What if I told you that the delicate dance of modern diplomacy, the encrypted emails, the back-channel negotiations, even the cyber warfare of today, has roots stretching back to these shadowed corridors of history? Long before satellites and firewalls, medieval minds crafted ingenious ways to hide their truths. They used everything from simple letter substitutions to elaborate ciphers that would stump even the sharpest eyes. And it wasn't just about the codes themselves, it was the people who carried them. Spies moved like ghosts through royal courts, their loyalties as fluid as the alliances they undermined or secured. A merchant might be a secret informant, a minstrel could be a messenger, and even a monk's humble scroll might contain a treasonous plot. This was a world where trust was currency, and deception was the sharpest tool in the chest. But why does this matter to us now? Because the stories of these medieval masterminds aren't just relics, they're blueprints. The same tactics used to safeguard a king's missive 700 years ago echo in the encryption protecting your online transactions today. The betrayals, the double agents, the desperate bids to stay one step ahead, they reveal timeless truths about power, fear, and the lengths humans will go to protect what's theirs. So as we unravel these hidden threads together, prepare to see history in a new light. This isn't just about dusty scrolls and forgotten ciphers. It's about understanding how the art of secrecy shaped our world and how it still does. The past is waiting to be decoded. Let's begin. Medieval espionage didn't spring up overnight. It grew from necessity, as fragile alliances and shifting borders made information the ultimate weapon. Take the Byzantine Empire, where emperors like Justinian I understood that survival depended on staying 3 steps ahead of their enemies, their secret weapon. The Magistrini, a shadowy network of agents who blended into foreign courts, gathering whispers of rebellion or invasion before they could take shape. These operatives weren't just messengers, they were masters of disguise, slipping into roles as merchants, pilgrims, or even deserters to extract secrets. And when they couldn't eavesdrop, they crafted them, planting false rumors to turn enemies against one another, a tactic so effective it's still studied in military academies today. But the Byzantines weren't alone in this game. Across Europe, the Vatican spies, often monks or diplomats, kept meticulous records of every noble's loyalty, every peasant's grievance, weaving a web of influence that stretched from London to Jerusalem. A papal envoy might seem like a humble cleric, but his saddlebags could hold letters written in cipher, detailing which king was plotting against the church. And then there were the merchants, the unsung spies of the medieval world. A Florentine wool trader, for example, could move freely between cities, his ledgers hiding coded accounts of troop movements or supply shortages. These networks were so sophisticated that some historians argue they rivaled modern intelligence agencies in sheer reach, just without the satellites. What's fascinating is how little the core principles have changed. a Byzantine agent's trick of using lemon juice as invisible ink mirrors today's digital steganography, where data hides in plain sight. And the Vatican's practice of compartmentalizing information, where no single spy knew the full mission, is echoed in modern, need-to-know protocols. Even the medieval obsession with verifying sources feels eerily familiar. A 12th century spymaster would have scoffed at fake news just as sharply as a 21st century analyst. The tools may have evolved, but the game remains the same. Trust no one, question everything, and always have an exit strategy. Yet perhaps the most enduring lesson from these early spies is how they turned weakness into strength. Without radios or rapid transport, they relied on ingenuity, like the Venetian ambassadors who developed a shorthand so dense that even if their letters were intercepted, the message stayed safe. Or the French knights who sewed tiny, folded dispatches into the hems of their tunics, knowing no one would dare strip search a nobleman. These weren't just tricks, they were acts of defiance, proving that in a world where power seemed reserved for those with the largest armies, the cleverest minds often held the real keys. And that's a truth no cipher can ever hide. Imagine riding for days through bandit-infested forests, your saddlebags stuffed with letters that could start a war or prevent one. This was the daily gamble of medieval messengers, the unsung heroes who turned dirt roads into information highways. While kings and nobles plotted in candlelit chambers, it was these couriers who braved storms, ambushes, and rival agents to keep the gears of diplomacy turning. But their job wasn't just about speed, it was about secrecy. The smartest messengers never carried written words at all. Instead, they memorized entire speeches, delivering them word for word like human parchment. A captured courier might be tortured, but if the message lived only in his mind, it died with him, a grim but effective encryption. Some messengers took even cleverer precautions. Wax seals stamped with a lord's signet ring weren't just for show. A broken seal meant tampering, so couriers slept with letters tucked against their skin, knowing the wax's integrity was as vital as the words inside. Others used tricks straight from a spy's handbook. Letters dipped in alum solution appeared blank until brushed with vinegar, or dispatches written between the lines of an innocent prayer book. One famous case involved a Florentine ambassador who sewed a coded treaty into the lining of his horse's saddle, betting correctly that no thief would bother with a sweaty piece of leather. Yet for all their ingenuity, messengers lived in constant danger. A French courier in the 1200s had his tongue cut out by rival agents to prevent him from reciting a message, only for his employer to realize he'd taught the man to tap the words in code using his boot heel. Bribery was rampant too. The archives of Venice's Council of Ten are filled with payments to couriers who lost certain letters mid-journey. And then there were the double agents, like the Englishman who worked for both York and Lancaster during the Wars of the Roses, subtly altering messages to stoke conflict on both sides. What's striking is how these medieval practices mirror modern dilemmas. A diplomat today might send sensitive emails through encrypted channels, but just like their ancestors, they still rely on human judgment, choosing the right person to carry the truth. And while we've swapped wax seals for digital signatures, the core challenge remains: how to prove a message hasn't been altered. Even the risks feel familiar. Corporate whistleblowers and leaked documents show that information has always been worth killing for. The medieval messenger's creed, trust no road, expect no mercy, wasn't paranoia. It was protocol. Perhaps that's why their stories resonate. These weren't just deliverymen. They were gamblers playing chess with their lives, where every river crossing or roadside inn could be a trap. Their legacy isn't just in the letters they carried, but in the uncomfortable truth they reveal. Diplomacy has always been a knife's edge between honesty and deception. And sometimes the most powerful words were the ones never written down at all. Ciphers transformed ordinary letters into labyrinths of meaning, where every stroke of the quill could be a decoy or a dagger. Take the Caesar cipher, named for Julius but perfected by medieval scribes, a deceptively simple trick where each letter in the alphabet was shifted by a set number. To an outsider, the text looked like gibberish, but to a diplomat holding the key, core became hello with a shift of 3. This wasn't child's play, it was statecraft. When Richard the Lionheart's allies used it to coordinate during the Crusades, a captured letter might as well have been a grocery list to enemy eyes. Yet even this method had its flaws. Crack one message and every subsequent dispatch fell like dominoes, which is why the shrewdest minds kept evolving the game. Symbols, though, were the true poetry of covert communication. A medieval diplomat's seal wasn't just wax, it was a semaphore. The 100 Years' War saw French and English negotiators exchanging letters adorned with carefully chosen emblems, a dove for truce offers, a serpent for unresolved grudges. In the margins of these documents, tiny sketches, a crown tilted askew, a broken chain, could hint at a king's wavering authority or a fragile alliance. Even colors carried weight. The Visconti family of Milan famously used a viper in their crest, but painted it blue in secret correspondence to signal imminent danger. These visual shortcuts bypassed language barriers, turning art into a universal spycraft, but the real genius lay in layering methods. A letter from the Holy Roman Emperor might appear benign, its cipher cracked with ease, only for the true message to hide in the pattern of ink flecks on the parchment, visible under candlelight. Or consider the grill cipher, where a physical template with cut-out holes was placed over seemingly random text, revealing keywords beneath. One surviving example from Burgundy shows a love poem masking troop movements, proof that romance and warfare often shared the same page. What's startling is how these tactics blurred the line between paranoia and prudence. When the Duke of Brittany received a letter with a hedgehog watermark, a known symbol for vigilance, he reportedly doubled his guards, averting an assassination. Meanwhile, the Tudors employed musicians to embed codes in sheet music, knowing courtiers would hum the tune but miss the meaning. In an era without firewalls, creativity was the ultimate encryption. Every flourish of ink, every choice of parchment grain, even the spacing between words could be a silent shout in a world trained to listen for whispers. Yet for all their cunning, these systems relied on a fragile human element, trust, a cipher key given to the wrong squire, a symbol misinterpreted by an overzealous envoy. Such slips could unravel years of strategy. Perhaps that's why the most enduring lesson from these parchment puzzles isn't about codes at all, but about people. The brightest ciphers faded once their logic was exposed, but the instinct to hide, to hint, to speak without saying, that never went out of style. The Caesar cipher might seem laughably simple now, but in an era where most couldn't read their own language, let alone crack a shifted alphabet, it was revolutionary. Picture a medieval scribe hunched over parchment, painstakingly replacing every letter with its counterpart 3 places down the alphabet, a task tedious enough to deter casual snoops, yet straightforward for trusted allies with the key. What made it ingenious wasn't just its mechanics, but its adaptability. A shift of 3 was common, but savvy operators varied the number, creating custom keys for different correspondents. A letter between French nobles might use a shift of 5, while English spies employed a shift of 7, turning identical methods into unique locks. Charlemagne's court allegedly relied on this very trick to shield military maneuvers from prying eyes. Imagine a Frankish general receiving a scroll that appeared to list crop yields only for the real orders to emerge when he slid each letter back by 4. To an illiterate scout or a rival envoy, the message was meaningless noise. Even literate foes would dismiss it as a scribe's error unless they knew to question the pattern. And that was the cipher's brilliance. It hid in plain sight, exploiting the medieval world's patchy literacy and chaotic handwriting to slip secrets through enemy lines. Yet the Caesar cipher's true legacy lies in its DNA. Modern encryption, from your Wi-Fi password to banking security, builds on the same principle of substitution, just with layers of complexity Caesar couldn't fathom. Those medieval scribes were pioneers, proving that secrecy wasn't about inventing unbreakable codes, but about staying one step ahead of the competition. After all, the cipher didn't fail when opponents cracked it. It failed when users grew complacent, recycling the same shifts until rivals caught on. A lesson as relevant today as it was in Charlemagne's war tense. In the arms race of secrecy, adaptability is the only true constant. What's remarkable is how these ancient techniques mirror our digital dilemmas. A medieval lord rotating cipher shifts resembles a IT admin updating firewalls, both battling human laziness as much as external threats. And just as a bored scribe might reuse an old key, modern users recycle passwords, ignoring history's warning that stagnation is the real vulnerability. The Caesar cipher's endurance reminds us that the weakest link in security has never been the code itself, but the hands that wield it. 700 years later, we're still learning that lesson, one shifted letter at a time. A single drop of lemon juice could be deadlier than a dagger in the hands of a medieval spy. While modern audiences might picture invisible ink as a child's trick, in the Middle Ages, it was a lifeline or a death sentence. The simplest methods relied on chemistry anyone could find in a kitchen. Citrus juice, milk, or vinegar brushed onto parchment dried clear, only darkening when held near a candle's flame. But the real artistry lay in the delivery. A seemingly innocent love letter from a queen to her cousin might burst with hidden treason when warmed, its invisible plea for troops materializing like a ghost between the lines. Urine, surprisingly, was another favorite medium. While it sounds crude, its ammonia content made it ideal for secret writing, leaving no trace until heated. One surviving example from the War of the Roses shows a Yorkist sympathizer's letter dripping with mundane gossip until the recipient held it over a brazier, revealing a map of Lancaster troop positions. Even more ingenious were pricked letters, where tiny pinpricks beneath certain words spelled out coordinates or names. To the untrained eye, the holes looked like accidental quill marks or parchment flaws. But to an agent running their finger lightly over the surface, those barely perceptible bumps became a lifeline. Some spies took concealment to theatrical extremes. Wax seals weren't just for authenticity, they could hide entire dispatches. A notorious case from 14th century France involved a diplomat who embedded a silk thread coated in ink within the seal itself. When unraveled and pressed against paper, the thread left a coded message visible only under moonlight. Others stashed notes in the folds of parchment, a technique so effective that archivists today still discover hidden texts when flattening ancient documents. What's astonishing is how these methods mirrored the psychology of the times. In an era where parchment was precious, no one questioned a scribe, reusing a seemingly scraped clean sheet perfect for hiding messages beneath the new text. And because medieval letters were often read aloud to groups, hidden ink ensured only the intended recipient, holding the page near a hearth, saw the truth. This duality, public innocence, private revelation, was the spy's greatest weapon. Yet for all their craft, these techniques had a fatal flaw: human error. A servant might toss a blank parchment into the fire for warmth, incinerating critical intelligence, or a recipient, unaware of the secret, might discard what looked like a botched letter. The most tragic example, a Milanese spy's invisible plea for rescue, written in milk, was never heeded by his captors, leaving his fate as invisible as his words. The legacy of these methods isn't just in their cleverness, but in their reminder that secrecy thrives on imagination. Today's digital steganography, hiding data in image pixels or audio files, is just a high-tech echo of monks writing between the lines of psalms. The tools evolve, but the game remains: how to shout secrets in a room full of enemies and make sure only one person hears. The Vatican's corridors held more than just prayers. They pulsed with the quiet hum of codebreakers at work. Long before modern surveillance states existed, the Catholic Church operated its own shadowy decryption bureau known as the Black Chamber. Picture a room deep within the Apostolic Palace, where lamplight flickered over piles of intercepted letters, each one a potential threat to papal power. Here, teams of linguists and scribes pored over every smudged word, every odd spacing between letters, searching for patterns that could unmask treason. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was a high-stakes chess game where the prize wasn't territory but truth. Pope Clement Roman VII, near fall in the 1520s, reveals just how deadly this game could be. When whispers reached him of a conspiracy among Italian nobles, the Black Chamber didn't just read the suspects' letters, they studied them. Ink stains suggested hurried writing, a sign of nerves. Slight trembles in the handwriting hinted at secrecy. Even the choice of paper cheaper than usual implied the writers feared their missives might be seized. These weren't just letters, they were psychological profiles written in quill strokes. The Chamber's findings allowed Clement to strike preemptively, arresting the plotters before they could unsheath their daggers. It was a masterclass in how to weaponize minutiae, but the Vatican spies didn't stop at cracking codes, they rewrote them. Forgery became an art form, with church operatives expertly replicating seals and handwriting to plant false orders among enemy ranks. One notorious case involved a fabricated letter from the Holy Roman Emperor, designed to sow distrust between his allies. The ruse worked so well that 2 German dukes nearly went to war over it until the Chamber intercepted another fake letter, exposing the first as a fraud, leaving the Vatican looking like the hero who'd prevented bloodshed. This wasn't just espionage, it was narrative control, medieval style. What's striking is how seamlessly faith and spycraft intertwined. The same church that preached forgiveness in public maintained a private network of informants in every confessional booth. Bishops doubled as intelligence officers, their parish's perfect cover for gathering gossip from penitents. Even pilgrim routes were exploited, with monks acting as couriers for coded messages hidden amid religious scrolls. The Vatican understood something modern agencies still grapple with. Belief is the ultimate camouflage. Who would suspect a priest's breviary of holding battle plans? Yet the Black Chamber's true innovation was institutional memory. Unlike secular lords whose spy networks died with them, the Church meticulously archived every decrypted letter, every forged seal, creating a playbook for future popes. By the Renaissance, they could cross-reference handwriting across decades or spot a noble family's cipher reused generations later. This wasn't just a spy ring. It was an early data mining operation, proving that longevity, not just cleverness, wins the intelligence war. The lesson here isn't about religion or power, but about human nature. The Vatican spies knew that secrets aren't just found in locked chests or coded scrolls. They're hidden in the cracks between words, in the unspoken fears of a shaky hand, in the assumptions we make about what's sacred. And that's why their legacy endures. In a world where encryption happens at light speed, the oldest truth remains: the best codebreakers don't just crack systems. They crack people. Joan of Arc's letters crackled with the energy of a woman who knew words could be as sharp as swords. When she wrote to the English during the Siege of Orleans in 1429, her phrasing wasn't just bold, it was deliberately cryptic. Take her infamous warning: "You, men of England, who have no right in this kingdom, the King of Heaven orders you to depart." To the enemy, it sounded like religious fervor. To her French allies, it was a strategic signal. The King of Heaven wasn't just God, it was a coded reference to Charles VII's pending reinforcements. This duality made her correspondence impossible to dismiss as mere prophecy, yet too layered for opponents to fully unravel. What's often overlooked is how Joan weaponized the medieval world's reverence for scripture. Her letters wove biblical passages like Psalms 27, "The Lord is my light and my salvation," into military dispatches. To the uninitiated, this seemed like piety. But her commanders knew certain verses marked specific tactics, a call for night raids, say, or a warning of traitors in their ranks. Even her famed voices may have functioned as a cipher. Historians note that her visions of Saint Michael and Saint Catherine coincided suspiciously with the movements of Yolande of Aragon, Charles's mother-in-law and a key backer. Was Joan truly hearing angels, or was she relaying coded instructions from one of France's shrewdest political players? Her trial transcripts reveal even deeper gamesmanship. When interrogators demanded Joan explain how she'd recognized the Dauphin at their first meeting despite him hiding among courtiers, she replied, "I knew him by his advisor's silence." A baffling answer unless you consider that the royal court had likely prearranged this test, instructing nobles to stay mute until Joan gave a verbal cue. Every exchange was a dance of half-truths designed to protect her network. Even her eventual capture reeks of betrayal. The Burgundians didn't just stumble upon her, they intercepted a letter where she'd unusually named her next location, suggesting someone in her circle had manipulated the message. What makes Joan's story extraordinary isn't just her bravery, but her grasp of information warfare. She understood that inspiration and encryption were two sides of the same coin. A phrase like "France will be saved by a maiden" rallied peasants while subtly pointing allies to muster points. Her legacy challenges us to reconsider how history remembers visionaries. Were her miracles truly divine, or the work of a brilliant operative who knew that in the fog of war, the right words could bend reality itself? The truth, much like her letters, may forever hover between the lines. A minstrel strumming his lute in a crowded tavern seemed harmless, until the right ears heard the hidden command in his melody. Music wasn't just entertainment in the Middle Ages, it was a weapon wrapped in rhythm. Take the Troubadours of Occitania, whose flowing ballads about unrequited love often masked calls to rebellion against French overlords. A line like, "The nightingale sings of chains broken," might sound poetic, but to locals, it signaled a planned uprising at dawn. These singers moved freely between castles and villages, their artistry giving them access no spy could openly claim. Instruments themselves became tools of deception. The harp, with its delicate strings, could mimic specific bird calls, a nightjar's trill warning of approaching soldiers, or a cuckoo's cry indicating safe passage. Welsh bards reportedly used harp cadences to coordinate resistance during English invasions, their performances camouflaging military logistics as folk tunes. Even drumbeats carried coded meaning. During the Albigensian Crusade, Cathar sympathizers used drum patterns to mark secret meeting places, turning percussion into a map only initiates could follow. The real genius lay in plausible deniability. A lord humming a popular tune at court might unknowingly spread his own doom if the melody contained altered lyrics. One notorious case involved a French count who requested his favorite song at a feast, unaware the minstrel had swapped verses to alert co-conspirators that the castle's gates would be left unbarred at midnight. By morning, the count was in chains and the minstrel vanished into the crowd, just another wandering musician. This blending of art and espionage reveals a profound medieval truth: the best secrets hide where no one thinks to look. Today's intelligence agencies study these very tactics, recognizing that a viral pop song or a TikTok trend could carry modern encrypted messages. The minstrel's legacy isn't just in their melodies, but in their reminder that sometimes the most powerful messages are the ones everyone hears, but only a few understand. Ambassadors in the Middle Ages carried more than just fancy titles. They wielded a golden shield called diplomatic immunity, turning their privileged status into the ultimate spy's toolkit. Picture the Venetian envoy to Constantinople, strolling through the Grand Bazaar with a retinue of servants. To the untrained eye, he was just another diplomat admiring spices and silks. But those servants were often intelligence operatives, discreetly noting the number of Ottoman ships in the harbor or sketching the layout of the city walls. If caught, the ambassador could simply shrug. His immunity meant no local authority could search his residence or arrest his staff. This wasn't just diplomacy, it was espionage with a legal safety net. The Venetians perfected this art. Their ambassadors' encrypted dispatches, known as rilazzini, were so detailed they included everything from the Sultan's favorite foods to the gossip in his harem intelligence that could predict political shifts. One report even described how Ottoman officials hid military expenditures in palace accounting books, a revelation that helped Venice anticipate budget-driven troop reductions. But the real genius was in the delivery. Ambassadors used their diplomatic bags, officially protected from inspection, to smuggle everything from coded letters to miniature maps rolled inside hollowed-out candle wax. When the Ottomans grew suspicious, Venetian envoys simply hosted lavish banquets, distracting officials while their spies slipped out with fresh intelligence. Diplomatic immunity also enabled a darker game: bribery. A French ambassador in Rome once funded a network of informants within the papal court by discreetly donating to church construction projects payments that conveniently bought silence from key cardinals. Meanwhile, English envoys in Spain exploited their status to funnel gold to rebellious nobles, weakening the Spanish crown from within. These weren't rogue actors. They were state-sanctioned operatives, blending diplomacy and subterfuge so seamlessly that even today, historians debate where one ended and the other began. The line between ambassador and spy was often deliberately blurred. Take the case of the Burgundian envoy who, during peace negotiations with France, secretly measured the thickness of castle walls under the guise of admiring the architecture. His notes later guided siege engineers, proving that even friendly visits could be reconnaissance missions. And when the Holy Roman Emperor's diplomats accidentally left sensitive documents visible during meetings, they weren't being careless. They were baiting rivals into revealing which secrets they found most interesting. What's striking is how little has changed. Modern embassies still house intelligence wings, and diplomatic pouches remain exempt from searches. The medieval playbook using immunity as cover, bribing under the table, playing allies against each other reads like a primer for contemporary geopolitics. The tools may have evolved, but the game endures. Where there's diplomacy, there will always be spies hiding in its polished shadow. The Silk Road's caravans carried more than just spices and silk. They smuggled secrets in plain sight. Picture a Persian merchant haggling over bolts of fabric in a Kashgar marketplace, his casual chatter laced with coded updates about Mongol troop movements. Or a Nestorian Christian trader slipping a scrap of parchment between sheets of imported paper, its tiny markings detailing the political unrest in Samarkand. These weren't isolated acts, they were threads in a vast, informal spy network that stretched from Venice to Beijing, where every transaction could mask an intelligence drop. Marco Polo's legendary travels take on new intrigue when you consider his deep ties to Kublai Khan's court. Historians still debate whether the Venetian was truly just an explorer or a trusted agent gathering intel under the guise of trade missions. His detailed accounts of Yuan dynasty customs, military defenses, and even paper currency production read less like travelogues and more like reconnaissance reports. The Khan, after all, didn't just employ foreigners as curiosities. He used their outsider status to audit his own governors, sending Polo on diplomatic tours where he could observe provincial loyalty without raising suspicion. But the real espionage engines were the caravanserais, those sprawling roadside inns where merchants, pilgrims, and mercenaries mingled. By day, these were places to rest camels and barter goods. By night, they transformed into shadowy information bazaars. An Armenian wine trader might share rumors of Byzantine tax hikes with a Jewish moneylender who'd relay it to a Venetian spice dealer, creating a chain that turned gossip into actionable intelligence. The caravanserai's genius lay in its chaos, with dozens of languages spoken and no central authority who could track which secrets changed hands. Some traders took subterfuge further. The infamous silk letters of Central Asia weren't woven from thread. They were written on silk itself, lightweight enough to be hidden in a turban, fold or sewn into a saddle lining. Others used commercial codes. A request for 12 bolts of indigo-dyed cotton might secretly confirm the arrival of 12,000 enemy troops. Even currency became a tool. Venetian ducats stamped with unusual marks circulated as covert payment for informants, their slight deviations from standard coins acting as silent receipts. What's remarkable is how this medieval system foreshadowed modern intelligence networks. The Silk Road's blend of commerce and espionage mirrors today's corporate front operations, where business travelers still gather intel under diplomatic cover. And those caravanserai rumor mills, they're not so different from the dark web's encrypted forums, just with more camels and less Wi-Fi. The lesson written in the desert sands is timeless. Wherever goods flow, secrets follow. And the best spies are often the ones everyone assumes are just there to make a deal. Elena of Aquitaine's court wasn't just a center of poetry and troubadours. It was a hub of clandestine whispers where the queen's ladies-in-waiting doubled as intelligence gatherers. While kings relied on knights and diplomats, Elena leveraged something far subtler: the medieval world's tendency to overlook women as political actors. At her famous Court of Love, where noble women debated romance and chivalry, conversations conveniently wandered into the allegiances of their husbands and fathers. A playful debate about loyalty in marriage could reveal which baron might defect in a rebellion, and because women were rarely searched or scrutinized, they became perfect couriers. Elena's own daughter, Matilda, once carried encrypted letters to Germany hidden in the hem of her wedding gown, turning a royal procession into a covert operation. But noblewomen weren't the only players. Take Abbess Hildegard of Bingen, whose monastery functioned as a clearinghouse for secrets. Pilgrims flocked to her for spiritual guidance, unaware that their confessions about local uprisings or noble scandals were meticulously recorded and sent to allies. Hildegard's genius lay in her dual reputation. As a saintly visionary, no one suspected her letters to bishops contained coded reports. Even her mystical, invented language, long dismissed as religious eccentricity, may have been a cipher for communicating with fellow abbesses. After all, who would question a nun's heavenly tongues? Then there were the merchant-class women, like the Italian silk traders who used their workshops as cover. A loom's rhythmic clatter masked whispered updates, while bolts of fabric hid tiny scrolls in their hollow rods. One Venetian widow, known only as Isabella in guild records, ran a network that tracked Ottoman naval movements by selling embroidery patterns marked with harbor diagrams. Her buyers, unwitting sailors' wives who stitched the designs into household linens, unknowingly replicating enemy ship formations. What's striking is how these women exploited societal blind spots. A noblewoman's embroidery circle became a cover for plotting. A midwife's visits let her note which castles had pregnant heirs and vulnerable successions. Even the humble laundress had power. Castle servants rarely noticed her scrubbing bloodstains from a wounded courier's shirt or counting the extra place settings after secret diplomatic dinners. Their legacy forces us to rethink medieval power structures. These women didn't just assist male spies, they built parallel systems where gossip was intelligence and needlework could map a battlefield. In an era that dismissed them as politically irrelevant, they mastered the oldest spycraft rule: the best cover is the one no one thinks to question. A pigeon swooping over a besieged castle carried more than just feathers. It carried the fate of kingdoms in a tiny capsule strapped to its leg. These feathered couriers were the unsung heroes of medieval espionage, bred for speed and an uncanny ability to navigate hundreds of miles back to their home loft. During the siege of Acre in the 1200s, crusaders relied on them to coordinate with relief forces. Their messages rolled into minuscule scrolls no thicker than a blade of grass. But pigeons weren't foolproof. Rival lords soon learned to station archers along known flight paths, or worse, employ falcons trained to intercept midair. Some spies even fed poisoned grain to enemy birds, turning coops into silent battlegrounds. Dogs, though less glamorous, were just as vital. A hunting hound bounding through the woods might seem harmless until a guard noticed the odd bulge beneath its collar. English rebels during the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 used this trick, stitching pleas for reinforcements into the linings of dogs' leather harnesses. The animals' natural speed and territorial instincts made them ideal for short, urgent runs between allied camps. And unlike pigeons, they could be taught to avoid strangers, dropping messages only at the scent of a specific handler. Then there were the Mongols, who turned warfare itself into a messaging system. Their horse archers would shoot arrows wrapped in parchment over fortress walls, not to kill, but to communicate with sympathizers inside. One account describes a besieged Hungarian castle where defenders found a note promising mercy if they surrendered, tied to an arrow that had harmlessly embedded itself in a wooden beam. The Mongols' genius lay in weaponizing the very tools of war to spread information faster than any courier could ride. But perhaps the most inventive were the ravens, trained by Welsh princes to fly nocturnal routes between mountain fortresses. Their black feathers made them nearly invisible at night, and unlike pigeons, they couldn't be lured off course by rival bird handlers. A chronicle from Gwynedd tells of a raven named Branwen who delivered 14 successive warnings of English troop movements before finally being caught, not by enemies but by an overeagle castle cat. What's fascinating is how these methods reveal medieval spies thinking like modern engineers, exploiting animals' innate abilities without altering their natural behaviors. A pigeon doesn't need training to find its loft. A raven doesn't question why it flies at dusk. These operatives worked with nature rather than against it, creating a communication web that required no technology, just deep understanding of the creatures they enlisted. Today's military drones and robotic messengers may seem cutting edge, but they're solving the same ancient problem: how to outmaneuver human watchers by sending secrets on wings, paws, or even arrows. The medieval world knew something we often forget. Sometimes the best spies don't wear cloaks, they wear feathers. The Knights Templar didn't just guard pilgrim routes, they built a financial empire so vast it doubled as the medieval world's most sophisticated spy ring. Picture this: a French nobleman hands over a bag of silver at a Templar preceptory in Paris, receiving a cryptic receipt in return. To the untrained eye, it's a simple banking record. But hidden in its swirls of Latin script are coordinates for a secret meeting in Jerusalem, or the names of nobles secretly backing a crusade. This was the Templars' genius. They turned every financial transaction into a potential intelligence drop, their reputation for discretion making them the perfect cover for covert operations. Their system worked like a medieval Swiss bank with battlefield stakes. When Richard the Lionheart needed to fund his crusade, the Templars didn't just transport his gold, they used their network to track Saladin's supply lines, embedding troop movements in loan documents. A receipt for 500 Venetian ducats might secretly confirm the arrival of 500 mercenaries in Acre, while interest calculations could encode dates for planned attacks. Even their famed letters of credit, which allowed travelers to withdraw funds across continents, functioned as spycraft tools. A pilgrim presenting one in Antioch might unknowingly trigger a chain of messages alerting Templar agents to his political affiliations, or whether he was really a pilgrim at all. But their most enduring mystery lies in what vanished when the order fell. As King Philip IV's men stormed Templar strongholds in 1307, they found coffers emptier than expected and archives suspiciously sparse. Legends persist of a shadow fleet smuggling Templar treasures and secrets to Scotland or Portugal. Some historians argue their missing records weren't just financial ledgers, but encrypted dossiers on every powerful family in Europe: who borrowed, who betrayed, who could be blackmailed. The Vatican's sudden about-face during the Templars' trial only fuels these theories. After initially defending the order, Pope Clement V abruptly condemned them, leading scholars to wonder if someone had unearthed compromising documents too explosive to ignore. What's undeniable is how their legacy reshaped espionage. Modern intelligence agencies still mimic Templar tactics, using shell companies and offshore accounts to mask operations. Their real innovation wasn't in codes or couriers, but in understanding that money and information flow along the same channels, and that controlling one means influencing the other. 7 centuries later, their ghost lingers in every numbered account, every wire transfer that carries more than just currency. The Templars proved finance was never just about gold. It was about power. A wax seal broken and resealed could change the course of history, and medieval courts knew it. Intercepting letters wasn't just about reading secrets, it was about rewriting them. Take the infamous case of Robert the Bruce's supposed betrayal in 1306. English agents intercepted a letter from the Scottish noble to his allies, then skillfully altered its contents to suggest he was plotting against his own king. The forgery was so convincing that when it reached Edward I's hands, the furious English monarch launched a devastating campaign against Scotland, all based on words crafted by his own scribes. This wasn't just deception, it was diplomacy by quill and knife. Forgers worked with surgical precision. A skilled scribe could replicate the exact angle of a noble's handwriting, the subtle pressure variations in their strokes, even the way they dotted their I's. Venetian archives reveal how agents practiced for months copying a target's letters before attempting live forgeries. Some went further, steeping new parchment in tea to mimic age, or using heated blades to lift authentic seals without cracking them. The most cunning operations didn't create fake letters from scratch. They inserted single lines into genuine correspondence. A single forged sentence about unpaid debts could turn allies into enemies, as happened when Burgundian spies manipulated a letter between two French dukes in 1420. The psychological impact was profound. Once a ruler suspected their mail had been tampered with, every word became suspect. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II reportedly demanded his most sensitive messages be delivered orally after discovering a forged treaty with his signature. This paranoia bred bizarre countermeasures. One Castilian king wrote critical dispatches in a cipher, then hid the key in the pattern of stitches on the courier's tunic. Others employed trap phrases, prearranged sentences that, if missing or altered, would signal interference. What's chilling is how these medieval tactics foreshadow modern information warfare. A doctored letter from 700 years ago shares DNA with today's deepfake videos or manipulated social media posts. The players have changed, but the game remains. Truth has always been the first casualty in conflicts, and the pen, or the pixel, can still be mightier than the sword. The real lesson: in the hands of the right forger, history itself becomes malleable. Behind the ornate symbols and whispered oaths of Renaissance secret societies lay something far more practical, a direct lineage from medieval spycraft. The Rosicrucians didn't just ponder alchemy, they perfected the art of invisible ink recipes, passing them down through initiation rituals disguised as mystical rites. A Freemason's handshake wasn't merely ceremonial, it was a fail-safe identification method, evolved from the coded gestures medieval couriers used to prove their authenticity. These groups didn't invent secrecy, they institutionalized it, turning the scattered tactics of kings and popes into a disciplined science of subterfuge. Consider the infamous Invisible College, a Rosicrucian front that operated across 17th century Europe. To outsiders, it was a philosophical salon discussing astronomy and medicine. In reality, its members, many of them diplomats and scientists, exchanged intelligence through astrological charts where star positions marked troop movements, and herbarium specimens carried microscript messages pressed between leaves. When one member, Johann Valentin Andri, published The Chemical Wedding, its allegorical tale of a royal marriage hid detailed accounts of Protestant spy networks in Catholic territories. The book's bizarre imagery wasn't just esoteric, it was operational security, ensuring only initiates could decode its true purpose. Freemasons took concealment further, embedding espionage tradecraft into their very architecture. Large ceilings adorned with celestial maps doubled as encryption, keys the spacing between stars corresponding to cipher shifts for sensitive correspondence. Tracing boards, those illustrated teaching tools, often contained hidden city maps or harbor diagrams visible only under certain angles of light. Even their famed third-degree ritual where initiates reenact a legendary murder may have roots in medieval spy executions, serving as a grim reminder of the consequences of betrayal. The real turning point came when these societies infiltrated diplomacy itself. Sir Francis Bacon, a suspected Rosicrucian and Freemason, didn't just write essays. He redesigned England's intelligence apparatus, advocating for permanent spy networks over ad hoc medieval operatives. His protege, Thomas Bushill, later used Masonic connections to establish England's first systematic code-breaking office, staffed by scholars who'd trained in symbol-heavy secret societies. Across the Channel, Cardinal Richelieu, another alleged Freemason, modeled France's infamous cabinet noir after Rosicrucian cells, complete with compartmentalized roles and ritualized vetting processes. What made these groups revolutionary wasn't their mysticism, but their standardization. Where medieval spies relied on individual cunning, secret societies created reproducible systems. A Masonic cipher used in London could be deciphered in Edinburgh because both lodges shared the same geometric keys. A Rosicrucian physician smuggling messages out of Vienna could trust his Parisian counterpart to recognize the significance of a rose drawn with 7 petals instead of 5. This consistency birthed something unprecedented: espionage as a profession, not just a desperate gambit. Yet their greatest legacy might be the blurring of lines between secrecy and power. When Freemasons like George Washington and Voltaire rose to prominence, they didn't abandon their covert training, they weaponized it. Washington's Culper ring during the American Revolution operated with Masonic precision, using numeric codes and invisible ink that would have felt familiar to Templar agents 5 centuries prior. Meanwhile, Catherine the Great's alleged Rosicrucian ties helped her build Russia's first foreign intelligence service, employing diplomatic travelers who reported back through alchemical metaphors. The irony: these societies claim to pursue enlightenment while thriving in shadows, but perhaps that's the point. In a world where knowledge was power, the true Illuminati weren't just philosophers. They were the heirs of medieval spies who understood that sometimes light shines brightest when filtered through layers of deliberate darkness. Their rituals may seem antiquated now, but their core innovation endures: the belief that secrecy, when systematized, can shape history itself. A royal astrologer bending over a parchment filled with celestial calculations might seem like a superstitious relic, until you realize those star charts were medieval encryption keys. When King Charles V of France demanded his court astrologer predict the optimal date to strike English forces, the resulting document didn't just advise, it concealed. The alignment of Mars and Jupiter might publicly signify divine favor, but to Charles' inner circle, those same symbols marked the night his fleet would sail under cover of fog. This was astrology as active spycraft, where the heavens became a celestial cipher wheel. Take the infamous star letter sent by Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II in 1241. On the surface, it was a routine astrological dispatch noting the upcoming conjunction of Saturn and Venus, an omen of peace. But Frederick's Italian allies knew better. By counting the degrees between the planets as listed, they extracted coordinates for a secret Alpine pass where Swiss mercenaries would be waiting. To intercepting enemies, the letter was harmless mysticism. To those holding the key, it was a battle plan written in starlight. Comets were particularly potent tools. While commoners saw these fiery streaks as portents of doom, strategists like Genghis Khan weaponized their unpredictability. When a comet appeared over Central Asia in 1222, Mongol commanders spread rumors it signaled heavenly wrath against the Khwarezm Empire. In reality, the comet's appearance had been their signal to launch a coordinated attack across 3 borders. By the time Khwarezm scholars finished debating the omen's meaning, Mongol horsemen were already burning their libraries. The Vatican's astrologer spies elevated this art to bureaucratic precision. By publishing official star almanacs with intentionally skewed planetary positions, they could misdirect enemy forces while guiding papal allies. A French army in 1382 famously marched to the wrong valley after correcting their route using a forged almanac planted by Vatican agents. Meanwhile, the real document bearing accurate lunar phases crucial for night maneuvers reached papal troops via a chain of monastery astronomers sworn to secrecy. What made celestial codes so effective was their plausible deniability. An intercepted star chart required no suspicious hiding. It belonged openly in any scholar's study. The Arab astronomer Al-Kindi even wrote a treatise on using lunar eclipses as countdown timers, masking military preparations as academic curiosity. When the Castilian Queen Isabella needed to coordinate with Columbus during the Granada campaign, her messages arrived via Jewish astrologers whose predictions about Mercury's retrograde actually listed supply ship arrivals. Yet these systems had one fatal vulnerability: human error. In 1485, Hungarian defenders misread an encoded eclipse prediction as occurring 2 days later than planned, leaving their gates unguarded precisely when Ottoman sappers tunneled beneath the walls. The very complexity that made celestial codes secure could doom those who miscalculated the heavens' motions. The legacy of these astral spies lingers in unexpected places. Modern military terms like starshell flares and celestial navigation owe their origins to this fusion of astronomy and subterfuge. Even NASA's early space missions used star-based encryption, proving that when it comes to secrecy, some medieval ideas never truly fall out of orbit. A dagger concealed in a prayer book, a compass no larger than a pea embedded in a signet ring, a hollow tooth filled with enough poison to silence a traitor. These weren't props from some medieval thriller, but the everyday tools of spies who knew that the right gadget could mean the difference between life and a very public execution. Take the infamous death ring, a favorite of Italian assassins during the Renaissance. To the untrained eye, it was just another gaudy bauble adorning a noble's finger. But twist the gemstone sideways, and a tiny compartment would slide open, revealing enough arsenic to lace a rival's wine cup during a feast. The Medici family reportedly kept a workshop of jewelers solely dedicated to perfecting these lethal accessories, their creations growing ever more subtle, some with spring-loaded needles that could deliver venom with a handshake. Lockpicks were another staple, though not the metal tools we imagine today. A Burgundian spy manual from 1482 describes how to fashion picks from fish bones or hardened leather, materials that wouldn't clink suspiciously if searched. One illustrated scroll shows a pilgrim's staff with a hollow tip containing wax impressions of castle keys, allowing agents to replicate them later. But the true masters of infiltration were the Ottoman Hafizs, who used musical instruments as Trojan horses. A lute's neck might unscrew to hide lockpicks, while the strings themselves could be woven with silk threads strong enough to strangle a guard, then restrung in seconds to avoid detection. Then there were the navigation tools that put modern miniaturization to shame. Venetian glassmakers produced compasses small enough to embed in cloak buttons, their needles floating in viscous oil to prevent telltale rattling. Spanish spies carried Troubadours dice, ivory cubes with numbered faces that, when arranged in a specific sequence, revealed coded map coordinates. Even humble rosary beads doubled as calculators. By sliding certain beads, an agent could tally the number of soldiers in a garrison or compute the optimal night for a moonlit escape. But perhaps the most chilling innovations were the ones designed not just to conceal, but to deceive. A French manual from the 100 Years' War details Innocence ink, a mixture of oak gall and iron sulfate that appeared when brushed with vinegar, perfect for writing damning confessions on prisoners' skin, then making them vanish before trial. German mercenaries favored mercy blades, daggers with retractable points that left superficial wounds while secretly injecting belladonna. And in Constantinople, imperial agents distributed counterfeit astrolabes whose star charts subtly redirected enemy fleets into ambush waters. What's striking isn't just the creativity of these devices, but how they mirror modern spy tech. A medieval poison ring is the ancestor of today's cyanide capsules. Those fishbone lockpicks evolved into electronic lock bypass tools. Even the concept of gadgets as equalizers allowing a lone operative to outmaneuver armies remains unchanged. The materials may have shifted from bone to carbon fiber, but the philosophy endures. In the shadows, the smallest advantage can topple empires. These artifacts remind us that behind every great historical turning point, there was likely someone with a very sharp pen and an even sharper hidden blade. Crossing a medieval border wasn't just about geography, it was a high-stakes performance where one wrong vowel could land you in chains. Border guards in bustling trade hubs like Constantinople or Toledo weren't just looking for smuggled goods, they were human lie detectors trained to catch spies through the subtlest linguistic slips. A merchant claiming to be from Flanders might be asked to name the current price of Ghent wool, a test only someone who'd actually haggled in those markets would know. Pilgrims were quizzed on shrine locations along the Camino de Santiago, their answers cross-checked against lists kept by border monasteries. Even something as simple as how you pronounced the local word for bread could betray you. The wrong inflection, and suddenly your pilgrim's robe meant nothing. Those guards were already reaching for the manacles, but spies had their own bag of tricks. The smartest operatives didn't just memorize dialects, they studied regional body language. A document from Venetian archives describes how one agent practiced the distinctive Geno's habit of touching his ear when lying, a gesture he then deliberately reproduced to appear authentically corruptible to Florentine interrogators. Others exploited the medieval world's tangled loyalties. A mercenary caught near Burgundy's border might suddenly remember his grandmother was Savoyard, switching to that dialect mid-interrogation to confuse guards. The most brazen even faked speech impediments. Knowing stutters or lisps made their accents harder to place, a tactic recorded in the trial of an English spy who pretended to be a mute monk until someone noticed he recited Latin psalms a little too fluently in his sleep. The real genius lay in playing the system's assumptions. Wealthy travelers often bribed their way past checkpoints, so guards grew suspicious of those who didn't at least attempt to negotiate. Savvy spies would stage half-hearted haggling sessions over imaginary toll fees, their protests about unfair prices actually proving their local credentials. Meanwhile, Jewish and Muslim traders subject to extra scrutiny sometimes exploited their status by volunteering for invasive searches, knowing guards would focus on their religion rather than the coded messages sewn into their companions' garments. What's fascinating is how these medieval tactics evolved into modern security protocols. Those dialect tests, they're the ancestors of today's airport, random questions about your hometown's geography. The pilgrim interrogations mirror the way immigration officers now ask travelers to describe hotel reservations or relatives' addresses. Even biometric scans echo the medieval practice of recording unique physical marks, like the Bordeaux customs house that kept ledgers of merchant scars and birthmarks to prevent impersonation. Yet the most enduring lesson from these border games isn't about technology, it's about human nature. However sophisticated scanners become, there's still no machine that can detect a bead of sweat when someone's forced to think in their non-native language. 700 years later, we're still playing the same cat and mouse game, just with fewer manacles and more fingerprint dust. A banquet table laden with roasted pheasant and spiced wine might look like a scene of indulgence, but in the medieval world, it was often a chessboard where every move carried hidden meaning. Take the peculiar case of the herring cipher used by Hanseatic League merchants during trade negotiations. A platter of salted fish arranged head to tail signaled approval of a deal, while a scattered pattern warned of impending betrayal, all under the noses of oblivious rivals who saw only dinner. Even the humble loaf of bread could be a messenger. In 15th century Burgundy, bakers working for the Duke's intelligence network would score the crusts in specific patterns. 3 diagonal cuts meant enemy troops were massing, while a cross-shaped slash warned of poisoned wells. To outsiders, it was just artisan baking. To initiates, it was a breadcrumb trail of secrets. The real artistry lay in leveraging culinary customs, a host offering the guest's portion, traditionally the choicest cut of meat, with the left hand instead of the right might subtly indicate distrust to those fluent in dining etiquette. Venetian ambassadors perfected the spice code, where passing a dish of saffron rice first to the French delegate and then to the Spaniard could signal which alliance was prioritized that week. These weren't random gestures, they were rehearsed performances where every sip and hand movement held weight. One surviving menu from a Medici banquet shows oysters served after the roast instead of before, a deliberate breach of protocol that historians now believe signaled to Florentine bankers that loan terms had been renegotiated. Then there was poison, the silent negotiator. The Borgias may be infamous for their tainted wines, but they were far from alone. French court documents reveal how a certain marquis avoided execution by serving his accuser a fig stuffed with crushed emeralds, not lethal, but causing such violent indigestion that the trial was postponed indefinitely. More chilling were the seasonal assassinations, where allergens doubled as weapons. A Norman duke with a known intolerance to walnuts mysteriously died after a peace banquet featuring walnut oil-dressed greens. The killer, likely the same physician who documented the allergy years earlier while treating the duke's childhood rashes. What's remarkable is how these tactics exploited medieval social codes. Refusing food was an insult, so targets often had to choose between rudeness and potential death. This forced compliance made banquets ideal for psychological warfare. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Roman II once humiliated a rebellious baron by serving him an empty gold plate, a public declaration that the man's lands would be consumed by the crown. No poison required, the message was in the metaphor. Modern diplomacy still carries echoes of these culinary intrigues. State dinners carefully choreograph seating arrangements, while leaders' food preferences are analyzed for hidden meanings. Think Putin's notorious dislike of Ukrainian dishes. The difference: today's poison fears revolve around polonium-laced tea rather than doctored wine. But the core lesson remains: breaking bread together has always been about more than sustenance. In the right hands, a dinner fork can be as sharp as any dagger. Gutenberg's printing press didn't just revolutionize books, it reshaped the shadowy world of espionage, turning parchment skirmishes into full-blown information wars. Overnight, forgery became industrialized. A single workshop with the right type could flood a rival kingdom with counterfeit royal decrees, each bearing an identical wax seal that took scribes months to replicate by hand. In 1483, Hungarian rebels nearly toppled their king by mass printing official tax exemptions, sparking riots among peasants who'd never seen or questioned a document stamped with the crown's insignia. The chaos proved a dangerous truth: when words multiply, so do lies. Yet the printing press also gave spies an unexpected gift: standardization. Before Gutenberg, cipher techniques were jealously guarded secrets, passed orally between trusted agents. Now, manuals like Johannes Trithemius's Polygraphia rolled off presses, teaching even novice diplomats how to encode messages with grid ciphers and symbol substitutions. Suddenly, a low-ranking clerk in Lisbon could send a secure dispatch to Lisbon that matched the security of the Pope's own correspondence. This wasn't just progress, it was a leveling of the playing field where brains trumped birthright. The infamous Black Chambers of Europe soon stocked these manuals, training entire teams of codebreakers to intercept and crack messages at scale. The real game changer, though, was how printing altered trust itself. Medieval seals had been unique artworks, their imperfections proving authenticity. But with printed documents, authenticity became a matter of typography, and typefaces could be copied. Spanish spies in the Netherlands exploited this, forging Dutch naval orders so precisely that an entire fleet once sailed into a trap, convinced the commands came from their admiral. The response: governments began embedding printers' errors, deliberate typos, or misaligned letters as hidden watermarks. A single misplaced comma in a French treaty could reveal it as a fake, proving that even as technology advanced, human attention to detail remained the ultimate safeguard. Perhaps the most ironic twist was how printing accelerated the spread of misinformation. When Martin Luther's Protestant reforms went viral via pamphlets, Catholic counterintelligence retaliated by flooding German markets with doctored versions containing subtle heresies, enough to discredit Luther if readers didn't compare texts side by side. This was medieval deepfake warfare, where the press became a weapon to distort reality itself. The printing press didn't just make information more accessible, it made secrecy more sophisticated. What began as a tool for spreading knowledge ended up teaching spies a brutal lesson. In the right hands, every innovation is a double-edged blade, and that's a truth no amount of ink can ever obscure. Hidden among the pages of medieval manuscripts on hunting and horsemanship lie chapters that would make any modern intelligence officer nod in recognition. Take the Book of Horsemanship written by Ibn Akhi-Hizam in the 9th century. On the surface, it's a guide to breeding and riding Arabian stallions, but tucked between passages on hoof care and bridles is a masterclass in covert operations. Young recruits weren't just taught to ride, they were drilled in the art of tailing a target through crowded bazaars without glancing their way, or memorizing the layout of a fortress after a single casual stroll. These weren't just skills for scouts, they were the building blocks of a spy's tradecraft, laid out with precision centuries before the term espionage entered common use. What makes these manuals revolutionary is their systematic approach. Unlike the haphazard tricks passed down through oral tradition, texts like the Book of Horsemanship formalized spycraft into repeatable techniques. A novice might practice counting steps between landmarks to estimate distances blindfolded, or learn to describe a stranger's clothing in exact detail after just a heartbeat of exposure. Some chapters read like medieval versions of today's surveillance manuals: how to position yourself upwind to avoid alerting dogs, or use a polished shield as a signaling mirror by angling sunlight in precise sequences. The Byzantines took this further, with training scrolls that included diagrams of hand gestures for silent communication, a system so nuanced that tilting a palm slightly could distinguish between enemy approaching and ally in disguise. Disguise was elevated to an art form. One Persian manual advised agents to study regional accents by frequenting taverns where travelers gathered, noting how a merchant from Samarkand pronounced certain vowels differently than one from Baghdad. Others recommended wearing slightly mismatched shoes or carrying a fake limp flaws that made a persona more believable, since perfection aroused suspicion. The most intriguing lessons involved exploiting social hierarchies. A spy disguised as a leper might be shunned, but that very rejection gave them unrestricted movement through city gates, as guards dared not touch them. Similarly, dressing as a pilgrim allowed access to sacred sites where military plans were often discussed openly, assuming no one would suspect a holy traveler of eavesdropping. These texts also reveal a surprising psychological sophistication. Trainees were warned against the temptation to invent elaborate backstories. The more complex the lie, the harder it was to maintain under pressure. Instead, they were taught to weave fragments of truth into their covers. A spy infiltrating a French castle might truly have grown up tending sheep, allowing him to speak convincingly about rural life while omitting his recent employment by the English crown. Another manual from Moorish Spain included exercises in controlled trembling, how to fake fear when questioned, making interrogators dismiss you as harmless while masking genuine tells that might betray your mission. The real testament to their effectiveness: these methods survived. When Sir Francis Walsingham set up Elizabethan England's spy network, his agents used near-identical surveillance techniques from manuscripts written 500 years prior. The mirror signals described in the Book of Horsemanship reappeared in the American Revolution, with Paul Revere's lanterns adapting the same line of sight principles. Even today, intelligence academies teach variants of the memory drills practiced by medieval operatives, proof that while technology evolves, the fundamentals of human deception remain stubbornly consistent. Perhaps the most poignant revelation in these manuals isn't their cleverness, but their cautionary tone. Page after page warns against arrogance. The moment a spy believes themselves smarter than their mark is the moment they make fatal errors. A surviving copy from Venice's archives bears a margin note in faded ink. The best disguise is not to be unseen, but to be unremembered. 7 centuries later, that advice still separates the living spies from the legends. Thomas Cromwell wasn't just Henry VIII's right-hand man, he was the architect of England's first modern spy network, a web of informants so vast it made even royal whispers audible. His genius lay in understanding that power wasn't just about laws or armies, but about controlling the flow of information. While nobles jostled for the king's favor, Cromwell quietly recruited their servants, offering pardons for petty crimes in exchange for reports on their master's private conversations. A laundress shaking out a noble's bed, cheats might notice treasonous pamphlets tucked beneath the mattress. A stable boy could reveal which lords met secretly at midnight. This wasn't just gossip, it was data mining, Tudor style. Cromwell's ledgers, filled with coded annotations like Mr. W. Dreams of Monasteries, became the blueprint for Elizabethan England's infamous spy master Walsingham. The lesson: real influence doesn't always wear a crown, sometimes it carries an ink-stained ledger and knows where the bodies are buried. Half a world away, Ibn Khaldun proved that scholarship and spycraft could be two sides of the same coin. The famed historian and diplomat didn't just write about empires rising and falling, he manipulated their fates firsthand. Sent to negotiate with the rebellious Berber chieftain Abd al-Aziz, Khaldun didn't rely on threats or gold. Instead, he spent months studying the man's poetry, identifying vulnerabilities in his verses about loneliness and betrayal. When they finally met, Khaldun quoted those very lines back to him, framing alliance with the Sultan as the heroic redemption arc his own writings craved. The chieftain surrendered without a battle, undone by his own words. Khaldun's memoir reveals this wasn't luck, it was psychological warfare disguised as literary critique. His legacy endures in modern profiling techniques, where understanding a target's creative output can predict their next move. Then there was the extraordinary case of Marguerite de Brescia, a French noblewoman turned spy master during the 100 Years' War. After English forces attacked her castle and left her for dead, she didn't retreat, she reinvented herself. Posing as a traveling lace merchant, she moved between enemy garrisons, her intricate lace patterns actually encoding troop positions. A cluster of knots might represent archers on a hilltop. A deliberate gap in the weave could signal a weakened gate. Her masterstroke came when she gifted the English commander a set of gloves edged with her lace, the embroidery tracing the exact route French reinforcements would take. The unsuspecting commander wore them during a patrol, allowing French scouts to identify and ambush his party. Marguerite's story shatters medieval stereotypes, proving that the most effective spies often hid in society's blind spots. These operatives shared a common thread. They weaponized the ordinary. Cromwell turned household servants into intelligence assets. Khaldun used poetry as a psychological crowbar. Marguerite transformed feminine crafts into military maps. Their methods feel hauntingly familiar in today's world of data brokers and influence campaigns. The blackmail dossiers of Tudor England have digital counterparts in hacked emails and deepfake videos. Colden's literary profiling foreshadowed modern algorithms that parse social media posts to predict behavior. Even Marguerite's lace finds echoes in steganography, where terrorists hide maps in Minecraft screenshots. The tools have evolved, but the game hasn't changed. The best spies still understand that secrets aren't just found in locked chests, but in the unguarded moments of everyday life. What makes their legacies endure isn't just their cleverness, but their humanity. Cromwell's downfall came when he underestimated Anne of Cleves' ability to charm Henry without speaking English, a reminder that no intelligence network can account for every variable. Colden's greatest work, the Mukaddimah, was penned in exile after his own schemes backfired. Marguerite retired to a convent, her lace-making now devoted to altar cloths. Their stories resonate because they weren't shadowy supervillains. They were flawed individuals navigating systems where one misstep meant ruin. In an age of faceless cyber ops and drone strikes, these medieval spies remind us that beneath every stratagem, there's a person calculating, improvising, and hoping their secrets die with them. Augustine's pen scratched across parchment in the dim light of a 4th century monastery, wrestling with a question that would haunt rulers for centuries: can a lie save a soul? The theologian's dilemma, weighing the sin of deception against the virtue of protecting innocence, wasn't just philosophical musing. It was the moral battleground where medieval spies and their confessors collided. When a papal envoy lied to a warlord about troop numbers to prevent bloodshed, was he damned as a fraud or blessed as a peacemaker? The Church's own contradictions laid bare the tension. Pope Gregory VII publicly denounced espionage as the devil's eavesdropping, yet his private letters praised bishops who smuggled encrypted reports on imperial plots. This hypocrisy wasn't unique to Rome. In Islamic Spain, scholars debated whether the prophets' hadith condemning Khiana treachery applied to spies infiltrating Crusader camps. Fatwas quietly circulated, distinguishing deception for defense from deceit for dominion, a nuance modern intelligence agencies still grapple with today. The most revealing clashes happened not in lecture halls but in confessionals. A 13th century manual for priests, De Confessionibus Espionum, details agonized spies seeking absolution after poisoning wells or forging treaties. Some clerics offered penance, others demanded they abandon their service, a near-certain death sentence from vengeful lords. The manual's compromise: agents could keep lying if their intent was purely to shorten war's scourge. This loophole birthed chilling rationalizations. When a French spy named Jacquet lured English soldiers into a trap by posing as a defector, his confessor ruled the 200 deaths that followed were not murder but medicine for France's wounds. Such moral gymnastics echo uncomfortably in today's drone strikes, where collateral damage is justified as necessary for long-term stability, yet resistance flared in unexpected quarters. The Waldensians, a persecuted Christian sect, refused all espionage even to save their own lives. Their leaders argued that mimicking the enemy's deceit would corrupt their souls beyond redemption, a stance that led to their near annihilation but inspired later pacifist movements. Jewish scholars in medieval Toledo took a middle path, teaching that while lying to protect life, pikuach nefesh was permitted. Agents must confess annually and donate to victims' families. Their emphasis on accountability resonates in contemporary debates over NSA whistleblowers. What's haunting is how these medieval dilemmas foreshadow modern red lines. The Vatican's just espionage doctrine mirrors today's arguments for targeted surveillance of terrorists. The Waldensians' absolutism finds kinship in Edward Snowden's claim that mass data collection can never be ethical. Even the Templars' downfall, burned at the stake for confessions extracted under torture, parallels Guantanamo's interrogation controversies. The through line is clear. Societies always invent reasons to exempt their protectors from the rules they enforce on others. The ultimate irony: many medieval spies died without knowing if their sins were forgiven. A faded note in Avignon's archives captures one agent's plea: "Father, I lied for Christ's crown." Does that make me Judas or Peter? No answer follows, just a wine stain blurring the words, as if history itself couldn't decide. 700 years later, we're still staining documents with our uncertainties, still searching for absolution in the shadows. In the bustling markets of 9th century Baghdad, a scholar named Al-Kindi quietly revolutionized secrecy without ever touching a sword. His breakthrough frequency analysis turned coded messages into open books by studying how often certain letters appeared. Arabic's repetitive grammatical structures made it the perfect testing ground. Fast forward to today, and every email you send relies on algorithms wrestling with that same principle: how often patterns repeat and how to scramble them beyond recognition. Medieval cryptographers didn't just invent tricks, they uncovered universal truths about language itself, truths that still guard your online banking. The Arabs weren't alone in this intellectual arms race. Jewish cryptographers in medieval Spain perfected the Kabbalah-inspired Atbash cipher, which flipped the alphabet backward. A became Z, B became Y. Simple, yes, until you realize this mirrors modern symmetric key encryption, where the same key locks and unlocks the message. Even the Vatican borrowed these techniques, tweaking them to create cipher wheels that would later inspire Thomas Jefferson's famed cylinder cipher, a direct ancestor of World War II Enigma machine. The through line is startling. A 15th century monk's wooden cipher disk shares DNA with the rotating virtual keys in your Wi-Fi router. Yet the most enduring medieval innovation wasn't a specific code, but a mindset. Persian polymath al-Biruni wrote that secrecy endures only until someone thinks differently. This mantra birthed the concept of algorithmic encryption, rules so complex they couldn't be cracked through brute force alone. Sound familiar? It's the bedrock of modern public key cryptography, where medieval math problems about prime numbers now secure blockchain transactions. The Abbasid Caliph scribes would nod in recognition at today's digital signatures. They were just using quills instead of quantum-resistant algorithms. What's humbling is how little the core challenge has changed. When Arab mathematicians first noticed that the letter Aleph appeared in 12% of Arabic texts, making it easy to spot in ciphers, they identified a flaw every modern hacker exploits: human predictability. Today's phishing scams prey on our tendency to reuse passwords, just as medieval spies exploited kings' habits of signing decrees with predictable flourishes. The tools have evolved from parchment to pixels, but the game remains a duel between ingenuity and habit. Perhaps the ultimate testament to these medieval pioneers lies in their mistakes. The Zodiac Killer ciphers stumped investigators for decades until frequency analysis Al-Kindi's very method cracked them open. That's the paradox. The same techniques that built modern security also arm those who seek to break it. In a world where a single leaked password can topple empires, we're still playing by rules written in ink 1,000 years ago. The parchment may be gone, but the battle between those who hide and those who seek, that's eternal. From pigeon messengers to poisoned rings, medieval diplomacy was a high-stakes game of secrets, and lies one where a single misplaced word or broken seal could topple kingdoms. But what's truly astonishing isn't just how cunning these tactics were, but how little the core challenges have changed. A medieval spy slipping a coded message into a merchant's ledger, isn't so different from a modern hacker embedding data in a harmless-looking email attachment. The tools evolve, but the dance between secrecy and betrayal remains the same. Consider this: when you use two-factor authentication today, you're channeling the same instinct that made Venetian ambassadors demand verbal passwords from their couriers. That unbreakable encryption on your phone, it's the spiritual heir to the Caesar cipher, just with a few extra zeros in the math. Even the dark web's shadowy marketplaces echo the Silk Road's covert exchanges, where spices and secrets changed hands in equal measure. The actors wear different costumes, but the script hasn't been rewritten, it's just been translated into ones and zeros. Yet there's a deeper lesson here beyond the thrill of cloak and dagger stories. These historical maneuvers reveal an uncomfortable truth: trust is always provisional. The Byzantines didn't fall because their ciphers failed. They collapsed when they stopped questioning their allies' loyalty. The Templars' vast intelligence network couldn't save them from a king who weaponized public opinion against them. Every era's spies eventually learn that no encryption can protect against the oldest vulnerability of all human nature. So the next time you tap out a text or log into your bank account, take a second to appreciate the invisible threads tying you to those medieval scribes and schemers. Their world of wax seals and invisible ink might seem distant, but their legacy lives on in every firewall, every biometric scan, every agonizing boardroom debate over who gets access to what. The stakes may feel lower when we're not dodging assassins' daggers, but the game's essence endures. Information is power, and power is always worth hiding or stealing. If this dive into history's shadowy corners left you as fascinated as we were, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and drop a comment below what's the most audacious spy tactic you've ever encountered, ancient or modern. Until next time, keep your secrets safe, or at least better hidden than a Burgundian duke's love letters.